We've made a terrible mistake. An absolute and horrible mistake. After Travis fled my home, I took Olivia and the template doll out of the house and headed with them to the voodoo shop. Why would I go there? I hear you all asking me. Well, please allow me to explain. The voodoo store acts like a giant mousetrap for spirits. If you are killed in there or are cursed in any way, your soul is forever trapped inside the dusty walls. So that means that even though she was finally freed from her imprisonment, Mary is still trapped inside its walls. Taking Olivia and the template there was difficult to do. While I know that Olivia absolutely adores the voodoo shop since it gave her me and a friend in the form of King Creole, the things I've seen happen in there still haunt me. But if it meant that we could save Travis, I was willing to do it. Arriving at the shop and seeing that no one was near or inside it, we made our way inside. What Travis said was true. The voodoo store was reopening. And by the look of things, it was going to open very soon. Letting Olivia go and roam around the uninhabited store, I set about getting the seance ready and prepared. I still had the knife on me for safety, so I set that on the counter and began to pull some candles from the purse I had brought with me. Unlike Travis, I would hopefully be able to do this without reviving any vengeful spirits. "Mommy, can I keep this?" Olivia asked me, running to me and holding up a shrunken head. Recoiling a bit, I quickly took it from her hands and set it on the counter away from her. "No, Olivia. We aren't here for a shopping trip. We're here to try and save Travis," I told her, taking her hand and pulling her closer to me. She pouted a bit, but she knew that I was being serious, so she nodded. She pulled the template doll from her little pocket and held him close while I lit the candles. Now the other problem with the voodoo shop is just how many people have died here. The shop has been open since the 1920s. You can imagine just how many people King Creole has had his fun with. So doing a seance here risks other angry ghosts and spirits trying to latch onto any trace of the other side that they can. So we had to be careful. Lighting the candles, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Mary Simmons, I summon you forth to communicate with us. If you are so willing," I softly spoke in the dimly lit room. I held my breath as I waited for any kind of response. It felt like a million angry eyes were staring at me. They no doubt were jealous of me for getting a second chance. "You don't have to use my last name, you know. He never let anyone named Mary inside the shop anyway." A soft, snarky voice spoke to me. Opening my eyes, the form of a blonde woman came into shape. Smiling at her, I chuckled and nodded. That was true, even the name Mary sent Creole into a violent mood swing. "It's good to finally meet the famous Mary," I chuckled, the woman offering me a smile and fluffing up her blonde curls a bit. She looked stunning. I can see why Creole had her turned into a porcelain doll. Even if he was furious with her betrayal, her beauty was simply stunning. "I take it this is about Travis?" she asked me, coming around the counter and joining us on the other side. She looked down at Olivia with a raised brow. My little girl looked up at her and waved a shy little hand at her. That put a smile on her face. "How can I help?" she asked. "Creole has possessed his body. Not to mention the lack of sleep and everything that's happened to him has broken his sanity," I explained, sighing as I twirled my hair around my fingers. "I'm worried about him," I mumbled, chewing on my thumbnail. I could tell. The other spirits are really riled up about the fact Creole is back, Mary explained, looking around at the dusty and insidious store and sighed as she crossed her arms across her chest. "I'm going to be honest with you, Alexandra. It looks very bleak. Travis isn't strong enough to fight off the both of them. All it'll take is Creole to get the final upper hand and he'll be able to suppress both of them," the ghostly figure of the woman explained. I sighed hard and shook my head. "Is there any way for us to stop him? Perhaps Baron Samedi could help us again?" I asked her, but I received a shake of the head from her. "Why not? Creole promised him a percentage of the souls he brings into the shop to him. Baron is taking the bribe and turning the other cheek," Mary explained softly. My heart sank through the floorboards and right into the basement. How could that bastard have really found a way out of this? "Is there really nothing we can do?" I asked her. Really begged from her. The look she gave me was one of forlorn hope and then one of absolute terror as her gaze went past mine and towards the door. Raising a brow, I followed her gaze right into the button eyes of Travis. Well, I didn't even have to try and trick you into coming here, did I?" He giggled at me. A soft southern accent in his voice. That sent a chill up my spine when I realized he was wearing that all-black top hat. I reached out and pulled Olivia close to me while she instinctively pushed her face into my stomach. King Creole took a further step into his shop and looked around. His button eyes falling squarely on Mary. "Hello, Charles. Got to say you look better with some color on you," Mary said snarkily. A smile on her face. She thought because it was through a seance he wouldn't be able to touch her or retaliate. But she underestimated him. Because just as she said that, he reached out and grabbed her by the throat, seemingly pulling her out of the spirit realm and back into the human one. "And, Mary, it feels so good to be able to punish you again," he growled happily. Mary stared at herself in disbelief. Really, so did I had never heard of being able to literally pull someone back from the dead. But King Creole is always full of surprises. Which made the next part that much more surprising to me. He smashed her face against the counter. At which point her face shattered into a million little glass shards. I let out a scream at that, grabbing Olivia and holding her as close to me as I possibly could. Mary's body cracked all over the place before she crumbled away into dust. I watched as the pieces seeped into the creaky floorboards and disappeared. I looked up at Creole, who spun on his heels to look at me. A big wide smile plastered on his face. Olivia squeezed me hard, terrified about what might be happening to us. In turn, she hugged me so hard that she dropped her doll onto the floor. We both backed up to the wall as Creole followed slowly after us. "You know, Alexandra, my dear," he said with a chuckle, his dress shoes tapping on the hard wooden floor as he approached me and Olivia. "A lot of the dolls were very jealous that you were chosen instead of them," he said with a little giggle as he kept approaching us. His foot stepping on the voodoo doll and looking down at it. "What is this disgusting thing doing here?" he snarled. To which, Olivia let me go and quickly scooped up her doll. "Don't hurt him, Mr. King Creole. He's my dolly," she said, quickly backing up into my arms. I looked at Creole as he was. I said, keeping Olivia close to me and making sure she didn't so much as a step away from near me. The second she got out of sight of the both of us was the second I stopped being human, or worse, stopped living. He looked over to me as he got behind the counter, that sickening smile on his face. "Well, once I'm done dealing with Travis and his annoying alter ego, I'll open up the shop. And once the shop is open, I had the glorious idea of opening other voodoo stores around the country." I thought to myself, "Why have all your eggs in a basket?" He chuckled, reaching down behind the counter and pulling out 2 glass bottles and a sharp knitting needle. "How could you possibly run all those shops by yourself?" I scoffed, ever carefully reaching behind my back for the knife I had tucked in my purse. Creole let out a soft chuckle as he lifted up the knitting needle and tapped the tip with his finger. "I do have friends, Alexandra. You know that. Very good friends, in fact. Monsieur LeBlanc and Mr. Sinclair, for instance. They would love the opportunity to join my business. Once their own affairs are in order, of course." He chuckled, lifting the needle up and jamming it into his temple. I gasped and quickly covered Olivia's eyes as she screamed in terror. I watched as he twisted the needle around in his head and slowly pulled it out. A wispy, almost fluffy-like source of light exited with the tip of the needle. It was a bright and fiery red, seemingly wanting to escape from the needle as Creole brought it over to the bottle and stuck the needle with the light into it. "I'm sure you can figure out who that is." Creole chuckled as he pulled the needle away quickly and sealed it with a cork. The light inside the bottle grew bright and began angrily smashing itself against the bottle with minimal effect to it. "That could only be the other Travis. What are you planning on doing with them?" I shouted, letting my hands let go of Olivia and pointing an accusing finger at the voodoo puppet. He looked at me with a chuckle as he once again drove the needle into his head. This time he drove it in deeper, all the while staring at me with a smile that turned my blood cold. Slowly he pulled out another wispy light. This one was blue and made no attempt at resistance. "Aw, poor little Travis seems to have given up," he chuckled, placing Travis's soul into the other bottle and placing the cork into it. The light didn't move at all in the bottle, it barely even glowed, unlike the red one which shone like a lantern. I was thinking of turning them into dolls. Maybe keeping them on the shelf as a little fun knick-knack. He shrugged with a chuckle. He put his hands on the counter and smiled at me. I took the opportunity to strike, pulling the knife from my purse and driving it into his hand, pinning him to the counter. Quickly I picked up Olivia and made it like lighting out of there. while Creole screamed and raved after us. At this point, I don't know what to do. It feels like I've exhausted all my options and Travis is now trapped in a bottle back in the Voodoo store. And Mary has seemingly been completely wiped from the realm. He has a body back and it'll be only a few more days before the Voodoo store will reopen. I'm at my wit's end. Do any of you think you can help us? Wait. Olivia is screaming.